Welcome to my channel. Today, we shall explore what you didn't know about the Vikings. The Vikings were a group of Scandinavian seafarers who lived between the 8th and 11th centuries. They established trade networks across Europe, pillaged on monasteries, and made daring raids into the Byzantine Empire, Northern Africa, and even the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But did you know that not all Viking attacks were motivated by the lust for gold and conquest, and that they had other reasons for their exploration and raids in foreign lands? There are many things you may not know about these fierce warriors. So stay tuned, because today we're going to tell you some of the most mind-blowing facts about the Vikings. Number 10. They weren't just brutal killers. Although the Vikings were renowned for their fierceness in battle and their prowess as warriors, this reputation has overshadowed their many other accomplishments. In reality, they were more than just ferocious fighters. In fact, they were highly skilled craftsmen, too, which helped them make excellent ships that allowed them to travel the seas with ease. The Vikings were also known for their love of feasts and celebrations, which were often filled with drinking, music, and storytelling. They were also very superstitious and believed in a number of gods and goddesses, as well as a whole host of mythical creatures. Despite their sometimes terrifying reputation, the Vikings were a complex and fascinating people who had a lot to offer the world. 9. They used female bodyguards. Though the Vikings were undoubtedly fierce and strong warriors, it was uncommon for them to have female bodyguards. 10. It might seem surprising, but women in Viking society were actually quite free compared to other European cultures at the time. They could own property, start businesses, and even divorce their husbands if they so chose. Women were also allowed to fight in battle, although it was expected that they would leave the fighting to the men once they were married. As a result, it's not unheard of for women to serve as bodyguards to important figures in Viking society, such as a chieftain or a yacht. Female bodyguards would have been useful for protecting important people from both external threats such as other warriors, but also from internal threats such as jealous lovers or disgruntled family members. Number 8. Their ships were built without using nails. Despite their size and scope, Viking ships were surprisingly easy to construct, requiring no metal fasteners such as nails. Instead, the planks were held together using a technique known as clinker building, which involved overlapping the planks and fastening them together with wooden pegs, V's. This method not only saved the Vikings the trouble of having to search for and gather iron nails, but it also resulted in a lighter, more maneuverable ship. Clinker-built ships were also more resistant to leaks than the other shipbuilding methods of the time. Additionally, the Vikings' shipbuilding techniques were so advanced that they were able to create ships that were incredibly fast and could carry a large amount of cargo. Their long ships were up to 100 meters long and 20 meters wide, and they were able to transport goods quickly and efficiently across the seas. 7. Slaves were considered a luxury item, though slavery was common practice throughout the ancient world. The Vikings were one of the few cultures who viewed slaves as a luxury item rather than a necessity. Unlike other cultures, the Vikings did not rely on slave labor to maintain their economy or way of life. In fact, they generally preferred to hire mercenaries to do their fighting for them. As a result, Viking slaves were often treated better than those in other societies. Were given better food, clothing, and housing, and they were also allowed to earn their freedom through hard work and good behavior. However, the Vikings' attitude towards slavery began to change during the 10th century, when the demand for slaves increased due to the growth of the slave trade. By the 11th century, Viking slaves were often captured in brutal raids and were forced to work in terrible conditions. Number 6. They left behind many artifacts. Though much of what we know about the Vikings comes from archaeological evidence, it's still surprising how much the Vikings left behind in terms of physical artifacts. From their impressive ships to their intricate jewelry, Viking artifacts are prized possessions for museums and collectors alike. One of the most famous examples is the Oseberg ship, an intricately carved longship that was discovered in Norway in 1904. Other notable artifacts include the Gemonbu helmet, a beautifully decorated Iron Age helmet found in Denmark, and the Kells calendar, an illuminated manuscript that dates back to the 9th century. These artifacts not only provide us with a glimpse into the everyday lives of the Vikings, but also showcase the incredible craftsmanship and artistry of these seafaring warriors. No. 5. Their religion was polytheistic. The Vikings practiced a form of polytheistic religion, which meant that they believed in and worshipped multiple deities. Their main god was Odin, the god of wisdom and war. And he was often depicted as a one-eyed bearded man wearing a long cloak. Another important deity was Thor, the god of thunder, who is often shown carrying a large hammer that he used to smite his enemies. The Vikings also had a number of female deities, including Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, and Saga, the goddess of storytelling and poetry. Though the Vikings' religious beliefs were eventually replaced by Christianity, their legacy can still be seen in modern-day Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. 4. They explored far and wide. Though the Vikings are best known for their raids and pillaging, they also explored a vast area of the world. In fact, their longships took them further than any other European culture at the time. During the 8th century, Viking explorers traveled to North America, specifically to the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. This makes the Vikings the first Europeans to set foot on the continent. They also explored much of Europe, including the British Isles, France, Germany, and Italy. In addition to their travels for exploration and trade. The Vikings were also known for their fierce determination to conquer new lands. In the 9th century, they established settlements in Scotland, Ireland, and England. However, their empire was short-lived and eventually fell apart due to internal conflict. 3. They were buried with their treasure. Viking burial practices were a bit different from those of other cultures of the time. Instead of saving an elaborate tomb for their dead, the Vikings often buried their treasures with them. This was done out of respect for the dead, and also because they believed that the deceased would need their worldly possessions in the afterlife. For example, high-status individuals such as chieftains or jarls were often buried with weapons, jewelry, and other items that they could use in battle or in their everyday lives. Commoners were also buried with items that had personal significance, such as tools or toys. These burial customs allowed archaeologists to learn a lot about the Vikings' way of life and beliefs. Number 2. They lived in. Contrary to popular belief, the Vikings did not live in small huts or tents. In fact, they lived in large, sturdy structures called longhouses. These buildings were rectangular and could be up to 50 meters long and 10 meters wide. They were made from wood and had a thatched roof, and they were large enough to house several families. Longhouses were used for a variety of purposes, such as communal eating, sleeping, and storage. They were also used for important ceremonies and rituals, as well as for hosting guests. The design of the longhouse reflects the Vikings' need for large, open spaces for activities such as feasts and trading. Number 1. They fought against the Chinese. Though the Vikings and the Chinese lived on opposite sides of the world, the two cultures had a brief but intense interaction during the 9th century. At the time, the Chinese were aware of the Vikings' reputation as fierce warriors and were eager to get their hands on some of their weapons and armor. A delegation of Chinese diplomats traveled to Scandinavia to purchase weapons and other goods. The Vikings, in turn, were fascinated by the Chinese and their culture, and they exchanged gifts and ideas with them. The Vikings' superior shipbuilding skills and navigational techniques impressed the Chinese, who were already known for their advancements in technology and engineering. The meeting of these two cultures highlights the interconnectedness of the world even in the darkest of times. There are many more amazing facts that could be told about the Vikings, but these are some of our favorites. Do you think the Vikings were heroes or villains or somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.